enough early warnings about everything. We will commence and I'll give you some more. As this hearing is fully virtual, we must address a few housekeeping matters. I would like to remind members that for today's meeting, the chair or staff designated by the chair may mute participant microphones when they are not under recognition for the purpose of eliminating inadvertent or advertent background noise. Members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves. If we notice that you are not unmuted yourself, I will ask you if you would like the staff to unmute you. If you indicate approval by nodding, staff will unmute your microphone. You will get 3 warnings and then a demerit. 3 demerits. This is where we're heading, folks. I'm just kidding. I remind all members and witnesses that the 5-minute clock still applies. If there's a technology issue, we will move to the next member until the issue is resolved, and you will retain the balance of your time. You will notice a clock on your screen that will show you how much time is remaining. At 1 minute remaining, the clock will turn to yellow. At 30 seconds remaining, I will gently tap the gavel to remind members that their time is almost expired. When your time is expired, the clock will turn red and I will begin to recognize the next member. Finally, House rules require me to remind me that we have set up an email address to which members can send anything they wish to submit in writing at any of our hearings or markups. That email address has been provided to you in advance, to your staff. I'll keep my opening statement brief so we can get right into the questions. This morning, we welcome the Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service, Charles Reddick, to testify on the state of the IRS. Commissioner, thank you for being here today. The past year has tested the strength, patience, and resolve of the American people. The coronavirus pandemic is a public health crisis that has caused an economic crisis. Many Americans have lost their jobs and are facing food insecurity and struggling to pay their bills. Congress quickly jumped into action, passing multiple relief packages, which in part tasked the IRS with the Herculean effort of implementing these policies in a very short period of time. I commend the IRS what they have been able to accomplish. They have issued over 300 million economic impact payments, totaling more than 400 billion to help taxpayers during these trying times. For many, these payments have been a lifeline, enabling families to put food on the table, gas in the cars, which is why I want to make sure that every American who is entitled to this money receives it. I am troubled that there are people who have not received these checks. President Biden immediately got to work to provide additional relief for the American people. His American Rescue Plan includes the remaining $1,400 checks that people were promised. It also temporarily expands the child tax credit, which could help cut child poverty in the U.S. by as much as 50%. I fully support the $397 million for the IRS to implement this effort. Right now, we are 12 days into 2020 filing season. In a normal year, providing quality customer service and timely refunds is a challenge, but these tasks are now compounded and the IRS is stretched thin. With an unprecedented backlog of over 8.7 million unprocessed tax returns, staffing shortages due to safety concerns in IRS processing centers, outdated IRS IT systems, and the IRS's new role in administering stimulus payments and child tax credit, I'd like to hear from you, Commissioner, on the IRS's readiness for this season and if any additional resources are needed. Recently, the IRS published its first Taxpayer First Act report, which describes a 6-year plan to modernize the IRS, improve customer service, reorganize the IRS with servicing the taxpayer as its central focus. I'm eager to hear more about the benefits of this plan and how the IRS can move forward to accomplish these goals. Lastly, as the IRS is managing these multiple efforts simultaneously, I want to emphasize the importance of ensuring the safety of its workforce. With close to 80,000 IRS employees, many of which are required to work on-site during the filing season, it's crucial that the IRS adhere to COVID safety protocols and continue communication with the union and staff on all COVID matters. With that in mind, I want to take this time to thank the hardworking staff at the IRS for their continued commitment, expertise, and dedication to the mission. Mr. Commissioner, I look forward to having a robust conversation today on all these important issues, and I will now turn to the ranking member, Mr. Womack, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Chairman Quigley. And Commish, welcome to this hearing. It's great to have you here today. I'd like to acknowledge you and all of your employees at the IRS for the work that you've done over the past year. Things like getting multiple economic relief payments to Americans, implementing the other tax code changes included in the various COVID relief bills, dealing with the impact of COVID on your staff and their families, and doing your core missions of collecting tax to address the backlog of unopened mail and unprocessed returns, improper payments, which has always been something that I've been interested in, including back when when I was budget chair and we did the last budget that passed out of committee in the House. The plan on modernization of your technology, and how will you ensure that the inappropriate spending and political targeting scandals that occurred in the not too distant past have not reoccurred and shall not reoccur. Those are the kinds of things that are on our mind today, and I look forward to your testimony and the Q&A that will follow, and I'm going to yield back the balance of my time. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. Commissioner Reddick, thank you for being here today. As you know, you don't need an introduction anymore, as you have become an increasingly popular figure during the pandemic in dispersing the coveted stimulus checks. But in all seriousness, while we might not agree on everything, I appreciate our working relationship and how available you've been to me and your staff. Without objection, your full written testimony will be entered into the record. With that in mind, we would ask you to please summarize your opening statement in about 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Quigley, Ranking Member Womack, and the members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss IRS operations and our efforts to help taxpayers during the COVID-19 pandemic. Your comments and appreciation for our employees are very well received throughout our entire agency. And following these hearings, I get numerous emails from employees commenting about what you all mentioned on their behalf. And so it really is taken to heart. And I want you to know that myself, as well as every employee of the IRS, really appreciates your comments. The importance of the IRS to every American has become especially apparent since last spring, as our nation has faced unprecedented challenges. The IRS has been at the forefront of successfully providing rapid economic relief to taxpayers during COVID-19. IRS employees worked around the clock since mid-March to implement major provisions of the CARES Act, and especially the first round of economic impact payments to help millions of Americans. By the end of 2020, we had delivered a total of more than $160 million in the first round of economic payments, impact payments, totaling more than $280 billion. During 2020, we also processed more than 163 million individual returns, including more than 125 million refunds, totaling more than $320 billion to individuals. IRS employees once again moved quickly to implement a second round of EIPs that was signed into law on December 27. These payments started posting to bank accounts just 2 days after enactment due to the efforts of our employees to monitor and the advanced preparation as we were watching the different variations of legislation move forward that gave us the ability for a quick turnaround. The second round of payments went out 2 days after the legislation was enacted, and it was 147 million payments totaling $142 billion. We made some mistakes throughout. We had learning lessons throughout. We learned a lot in EIP 1 that we applied in EIP 2 that we think prepares us should Congress and the White House, President Biden, enact an EIP 3. We think we're prepared to appropriately serve the American people. But we know that we can do more, and we know that we're being called upon to do more and more. And let me assure you that our employees want to do more. We take our tasks to heart. We appreciate the privilege and the opportunity that we have to actually represent the people of this country, and we will not let you down. We did not have a pandemic playbook for how to respond to a pandemic that shut down or slowed wide segments of the U.S. economy. Nonetheless, thanks to the agility and flexibility of our workforce, we were able to move forward, rapidly switching to a virtual work environment and shifting the majority of our employees to be able to work remotely. At various times, we've had as many as 61,000 employees teleworking. Our IT division also provided the equipment necessary to allow thousands of our customer service representatives, excuse me, to telework. And we could not have done this without the support and the financial support of Congress throughout. For that, we are most appreciative. During the summer of 2020, we began bringing back a limited number of our employees to the offices to perform non-portable work, including opening mail and processing paper returns. At one point, we had a backlog of more than 20 million pieces of mail, but we have been steadily working through that backlog, and we are now current. We realize our phased-in reopening has been difficult for members of Congress, for your staff, for taxpayers, and others, and we appreciate everyone's patience and understanding of the situation that we were placed in as a result of the pandemic. However, the health and safety of our employees, as well as those we interact with, had to remain paramount throughout. Our employees shared the same health and safety concerns as shared by every other American for themselves, their communities, and others. Turning to the 2021 filing season and in closing, I'm pleased to report the successful opening of the filing season. At the first weekend, we received 55 million submissions, and at the peak, we were receiving 335 submissions per second. We opened the filing season slightly later than in previous years to give us additional time to do additional programming and testing of our systems, and we're confident in the systems and in the status that we find ourselves in today. Chairman Quigley, Ranking Member Womack, and members of the subcommittee, this concludes my statement, and I'd be happy to take questions. Can't hear. Chairman Quigley, I think you're on mute.
We do appreciate this, and as we've said over and over again, I want you to appreciate the fact that we rarely in our offices get calls from constituents when they get their payment. We rarely do, but we always do when they don't. So if you could do a bit of a deep dive explaining why there are still those who have not got those payments, what those reasons could be, and where the problems exist and how we move forward to make sure everyone who's entitled gets those payments.
There's a number of reasons. I can touch on the outreach side of it. Let me touch more on the technical side of it. The CARES Act, both acts actually for EIPs, dictated a look at the 2019 tax returns, and then if the 19 returns were not filed, a look at the 2018 returns. So I think the concept was well placed. There are tens of millions of people who do not have filing requirements, and so during the issuance of EIP1, we reached out and coordinated our efforts with both the VA and the SSA, because most of the beneficiaries of their payments actually do not have filing requirements. And so we coordinated a programming for their folks so that we could get payments. And we actually reached out to more than 11,000 different organizations around the country with respect to homeless organizations, unsheltered homeless and whatnot. From what we've seen so far, if I can sort of a lessons learned in the folks who have not received payments, they may not be filers. They may be filers, and their returns may be caught up in a variety of situations. It's a pitch, if you will, for electronic filing, because as I said, we had more than 20 million pieces of mail stored at one point, and so we couldn't use those returns that might have been in those storages at that time to determine the returns. But for folks who actually electronically filed, we got over 90% of those payments out timely, including their refunds. And keep in mind that the individual refunds, and including EITC refunds, and in many cases, the CTC refunds, exceeded the amounts of the EIPs that were being issued. But nonetheless, a lot of returns, about less than 10%, but some of the returns hit various filters that we have. And we have identity theft. We have situations where we've asked for additional information from people. So that would be a situation where maybe the 2019 return would not have been processed, and been processed means actually posted to the account so that we could draw the information from that return. From a staffing and a contact perspective, we have 13,760 CSRs customer service representatives, who essentially is our phone bank. We do, through the year, we did and we do provide, when requested by FEMA, as many as 3,000 of our phone bank representatives when there's a hurricane, a natural disaster, wildfires and whatnot. And I should indicate that we just got a request from FEMA this week for 200 of our CSRs to participate with assistance down in Texas. And essentially we flip a switch and our people go from being IRS CSRs to doing intake for FEMA. So we get called upon for a lot of different tasks. We did well overall, when you get into the 90+% range, but it's easy and appropriate to turn it around and say there was the 10% or so that we've been trying to connect with. I will say that personally, I touch base with hundreds of different organizations around the country. We coordinated efforts with low-income taxpayer clinics and actually provided them with the authority to prepare returns for people who did not have returns, such that they could get economic impact payments. And it's easy for me to talk about the successes, and we're very proud about our successes. But similarly, we want to do more. Our people live in the communities and are reflective of the communities, and we're very proud of that. And it's not acceptable to us that any person did not receive a payment. I will say that the outreach and the organizations that we interacted with, including more than 400 different federal and state agencies throughout the country, were invaluable in helping us get the word out. Our outreach materials, really associated with private practitioners, assisted us in getting our outreach materials out for EIP in more than 35 different languages. We prepared toolkits. We delivered 541 toolkits to the Hill, giving people, the information that what might be needed. And none of this and none of my comments should be reflective as an effort for an excuse. We understand the importance of getting the payments out to people. That, there's a variety of different things with respect to staffing at the Internal Revenue Service. I will say that I'm very proud of our employees who worked, our IT department and our wage and investment folks literally worked 15, 17-hour days from March. I don't think our CIO has slept since March. And, we had a filing season, NEIP 1, NEIP 2, to go with our normal functions. And I am the guy, as sir, you've heard me say before, who shut down 511 of our facilities and then had to figure out how to get back. And we had to balance those responsibilities with everything else. And I would also like to express our appreciation to NTEU, as well as personally to Tony Reardon. During much of 2020, I was on weekly calls with Tony Reardon, who's president of NTEU, and we were totally in sync in terms of protecting our employees and recognizing the duty that we had to the country. So we can go down a lot of different lanes. The bottom line is,
and we'll have time. I do want to get to the other members, and I appreciate that. And look, I appreciate your answer in your candid manner and your staff. But not to cut you off, I want to be a good example and let the other members ask their questions, beginning with Mr. Womack.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Mike. Look, I understand that my colleague Chris Stewart from Utah may have a hard time that he's got to get out. And if that's the case, I would be willing to defer any questions I have for the commissioner if Chris wants to chime in and get his questions out of the way, because I think he's got a flight to catch. Chris, are you on there? Would you want to take a moment here to ask a couple of questions? Well, I'm not hearing Chris. Maybe he is already logged on.
Well, if he comes on and you want to defer in the middle of yours, we'll abide, whatever works for you.
Yeah, I just saw that he had logged on, and I wanted to make sure he had an opportunity to get involved in the Q&A. Thanks again, Commissioner, for being here. I've always been concerned, and I've kind of put this under the headline of mission creep. When federal agencies get beyond their core functions, and it always bothers me a little bit, and I think it becomes an expensive issue for the agency. I've picked on the VA because when they build hospitals, they're not in the business of building hospitals or developing IT infrastructure, and they have IT problems. There are other organizations that do that better. For the IRS, when Obamacare was created, you guys were required to issue a tax penalty to Americans who didn't purchase certain health insurance. So now, in the reconciliation package that's before the House now, it has language in it about IRS issuing monthly checks to parents to address child poverty, activities that I believe are outside the core mission. So I know that you're going to say that the IRS is going to do whatever Congress asks of them. However, I want to ask these questions. When Congress directs you to focus on new things such as healthcare and children, the impact it has on your core mission of collecting, performing audits, and processing returns. How much of that attention and the attention of everyone in the agency will shift from your core mission of collecting taxes to implementing monthly payments to children? And would it hurt your ability to reduce the backlog that we've already talked about? Now, you mentioned that sometimes your agency is picked off by another agency like FEMA to go from your core mission to missions involving another federal agency. So that fits directly into my question here. So help me understand how we can be assured that your core mission gets executed without the interference from other outside distractions laid upon you by Congress.
Well, you are correct that in my first comment that the IRS stands ready to serve. The IRS does not pick its challenges. The IRS receives, long before I came on board, numerous challenges. And I think the benefit of the employees has a history of rising to those challenges, certainly doing the best that it can and the best that it can under the circumstances. For any new endeavor provided to the Internal Revenue Service, funding, staffing, training are critical. Multi-year, consistent, adequate funding is critical. 1 year funding not followed up the next year does put a stress on our resources as we end up having to borrow from to the extent we can, borrow from one side to help fund another portion of the agency. And, we are an administrative agency. We don't choose our challenges, but I'm confident in our people. But, we need the support, both financial and staff and training, and we need to have it in an ongoing manner as long as we're called upon to do any of these challenges.
In the fall, you and I discussed a delay in processing the Form 8849. This is a petroleum marketers refund issue. Small and medium-sized petroleum marketers rely on these refunds to support their day-to-day, and it's impacted some marketers in my particular district. Can you update me quickly on how these refunds are being processed, how they're being processed, and is there a backlog that we should be concerned about?
Yeah, we actually, as you would expect and as you would hope, and I believe as we talked about before, we prioritized refunds for everyone. We prioritized refunds for individuals as well as prioritizing refunds for businesses and whatnot during the pandemic. We made what we believe is the right business decisions, and certainly I believe is the right business decisions. December 17, we had an inventory on the 8849s of 7,405. We currently have a backlog. We've reduced it by 4,800. We have a backlog of 2,565, which we expect to be cleared out by the end of March. And again, we put extra staff, we provide overtime, weekends and whatnot to try to accomplish this, but we made significant headway.
Well, I know you did, and you sent a letter out on the issue after our conversation, and I just want you to know how much I appreciate that, and that's the kind of response that we all really want from our federal agencies, and in this particular case, you're delivering. So thank you so much. And Mr. Chair, I'll yield back that 12 seconds I have.
Thank you so much. Mr. Cartwright is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Commissioner Reddick, for coming back and joining us. Thank you for your hard work, and thank you also for the hard work of all the line employees of the IRS to try to take on all this additional responsibility during the pandemic. And finally, thank you for acknowledging mistakes. We don't hear enough of that in Washington. and that you're learning from them. That's very encouraging. And I want to get out a bunch of questions right off and get you to answer them. In the first two rounds of the EIPs, the economic impact payments, millions of people received their stimulus via a prepaid debit card. And from what we were hearing from my constituents in northeastern Pennsylvania, we got an awful lot of complaints that they threw those debit cards away because they weren't giving proper notice. They didn't have the heads up that this was money and these were payments from the IRS for stimulus. How was it determined that this particular group of Americans was singled out for prepaid cards when most people receive checks or direct deposits? What steps were taken to ensure that the requests to replace those cards that were lost or stolen or thrown away were fulfilled? And are there any major changes to the disbursement of economic impact payments for the future? In particular, I want to help ensure we help Americans get these stimulus payments as quickly and as early as possible. And I want to give you the opportunity really to help them arm themselves. For people that have had issues receiving their first or second stimulus payment, what steps can they take today to ensure they don't have continuing issues receiving a potential third round of payments? Commissioner?
Yeah, the IRS was not the decision maker, and it really wasn't even in our area as far as who would receive paper checks and who would receive prepaid debit cards. That was a decision between Treasury and Bureau of Fiscal Services. I think you're aware that the IRS provides payment files to BFS, and then BFS is actually the agency that issues the payments. We were asked to, out of the checks, so if we did not have, and Fiscal did not have direct deposit information, we were asked to provide separate files, which were the, if you will, paper check files. And from that, we were asked to do certain pieces of that, which they pulled out to do in the form of debit cards. I think the interest in doing the debit cards was to try to get the payments out quicker. Fiscal Services can only do between 5 and 7 million paper checks per week. That's their capacity that's in excess of the VA and the SSA. So in order to sort of shorten the length of those $5 to $7 million payment weekly checks, I think the effort was to try to do the debit cards, and certainly a lot could have been learned with respect to, and has been learned with respect to the debit card situation. One of the comments or the questions you have is, what can be done going forward? We and others, and I think Treasury would join me in this, as well as Fiscal, can always do a better job in terms of outreach and communications. Interestingly, a lot of people tend to believe, gee, if we put it on our IRS.gov or we do our normal channels that we would historically do in the tax world, those are sort of to tax people, tax practitioners and whatnot. But the person on the street is not looking at IRS.gov. They're not necessarily interacting with a CPA or a lawyer or, a professional organization. They're on the street. It's the person digging the ditch, the person running the electricals and whatnot. Really are the target area of the outreach that we did during 2020, which we refer to as people outside of our normal channels of communication. I think I mentioned we did partner with more than 11,500 different organizations, tenant rights groups and whatnot. But I think the bottom line, and I don't know whether there would be a similar decision on the debit cards going forward if there was to be an EIP 3. Again, that would be between Treasury and Bureau of Fiscal Services. I respect the decision to try to get the payments out earlier, but we were equally concerned for the fact that a lot of people shredded them, did not know they were coming, et cetera, et cetera. What can people do? They can file electronically and file as early as possible. Our filing season is open. Getting a return in that has direct deposit information, the bank information in the return, allows us to essentially flip a switch and issue those payments, which is what we used December 29 on EIP 2 when we issued 147 million payments totaling $142 billion 2 days after the date of enactment. We had that direct deposit information. And so getting that information to us in the form of a tax return is critical. For those who don't have, Mr. Chair, if I may finish one thought, I see I'm out of time. For those that don't have a filing requirement, we do have the non-filers portal where they can provide that information to us, and that would help us significantly.
Okay,
Thank you, Commissioner. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
thank you. Mr. Womack, you were trying to accommodate Ms. Stewart because of a flight. Do you still wish to do that? Do you know if he's on?
Mike, I got a text from him and he was en route to the airport. He's listening, but just not in a position to engage, but I do appreciate the
Okay.
opportunity.
No problem. Then I think we'll move on to Mr. Joyce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the recognition. And also a quick shout out to Mr. Cartwright, because that is commercial-like quality that he's engaged in there while viewing him.
Thank you, Mr. Joyce. Your cat filter is on.
Mr. Commissioner, I appreciate all the hard work you've been doing. I had a question. As you know, with the increase in unemployment benefits made available in the last year, unfortunately, it's come along with some increased fraud that I've taken notice of. You know, high estimated at least $330 million in fraudulent unemployment benefits were paid in 2020. This is a problem not only for the integrity of the unemployment insurance system, but also, unfortunately, the taxpayers who are victim of the fraud. And, you know, as you mentioned with the mail system, sometimes they're now just becoming aware as they're receiving this notice that they were in fact defrauded and their security was compromised. Unknowingly, these people have taken the unemployment benefits, had those shipped somewhere else, but the bill come due for their taxes is coming home to roost with them. Is the IRS taking any action to allow flexibility for states to need additional time to sort out the fraudulent benefits paid and hold individual victims of this fraud harmless for tax owed on unemployment benefits that they've never received?
We are working with the states, and regardless of anything else, I'm going to make this specific here, but regardless of anything else, because this was expanded this year because of the volume, but it's not unusual for folks to have identity theft and other things where there's issues that are hitting their account, which are not theirs, is to file an accurate return. So even though there's a 1099-G that might indicate somebody got funds, if you did not receive those funds, file an accurate return, reach out to the state and ask for a corrected 1099-G, which will be in a $0 received capacity. But even if they are unable to contact the state on their individual income tax return, do not report funds you did not receive. You're only required to report your accurate income. If you did not receive it because of identity theft or some other scenario, it is not income to the taxpayer. We actually, as have the states, and like I said, we've been working closely with the states, but we posted something again on irs.gov. We're doing our best to message through our normal channels and now our expanded family, if you will, of communications getting out to people. But we're very sensitive to this. We're taking a hard look at it. And in terms of your question about flexibilities, we are an administrator. We can't determine what is or is not taxable. For federal tax purposes, unemployment benefits are taxable. I think there's 14 states where it is not taxable. And so people also need to be aware of the difference between, federal and state. And we are taking a look at it. And I think at the end of the day, you can expect us to get this one right. It's on our plate. It's on my radar screen. For folks who did, if I may, who did actually receive the unemployment benefits, but who were unaware that it was taxable, file, report the benefits. You can actually even online do a payment agreement with us. You can request financial hardship. There's a whole host of payment relief that we have available. And again, our employees have gone through the same pandemic as everybody else. We are understanding and sensitive to the environment for the past year and, for the foreseeable future. So folks who actually received it, who did not understand that it was taxable, I would hope that they would reach out to us for some flexibilities in terms of payment arrangements. And I will say that every frontline IRS employee who they would interact with, whether it's through a CSR or in a more direct collection format, is aware of the comments that I just made. And I expect our people to be understanding, patient, and do the appropriate thing for people of this country.
Thank you. At least you give us something to go back to constituents who are calling in about going back to the state and having that cured. And I want to move on to another question regarding legal cannabis businesses. They're unable, as you know, to utilize our banking systems. And as a consequence of these arcane restrictions, businesses are forced to hire armored vehicles to transport their tax payments in cash to the local IRS. This is inefficient for business and the IRS alike, obviously, not to mention ample opportunity for fraud and the abuse it creates, as well as potential for criminal acts as far as robbing and stealing from those. How do you recommend we address this problem for your agency? And I'm talking about legal businesses, ones that have been defined as ongoing concerns, meeting all the statutory requirements of the states that they do business in.
Yeah, the IRS would prefer direct deposits more so than receiving actual cash payments. It's a security issue for the IRS. It's a security issue for our employees. In our taxpayer assistance centers is actually where we receive these payments, and we created special facilities in the tax to receive the payments, and then we similarly have to transport the payments themselves. So again, the money is fungible. We have to receive it, and we don't make a determination as to what is or is not legal, but the tax payments do come in, and we would rather have direct deposits if we could.
And no one is sending you the over $10,000 in cash to pay their bills is receiving a SARS, are they?
That's on the banking side of the house, and I'm just a tax guy.
Thank you. I'm out of time.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Joyce. Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Commissioner Reddick, for all of the work that you, the wonderful people at IRS have done, particularly through this pandemic. The Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program that's managed by IRS has been a tremendous success over the years, and this program helps Americans who make $57,000 or less, are disabled, or limited English speakers to file a tax return for free. In 2020, the program had about 10,000 fewer volunteers and prepared 1 million fewer tax returns due to the pandemic. Some experts worry that changes to the program due to the pandemic will leave millions of Americans without the help they need to file in a time when submitting a tax return is extremely important, especially to these low-income people. The most vulnerable Americans will be hurt the most by these changes, especially those who don't have access to high-speed internet or to a computer, as many sites shift to online appointments. Speak to how the IRS will ensure that every American has access to the vital program during the pandemic, including those in rural areas and those without high-speed internet. And I guess I'll go ahead and ask my second question quickly so that you can get to it. It has to do with the IRS rule on farming cooperatives. Many of the farmers in my district and across the country are members of agriculture cooperatives where the farmers pool their resources to enhance their economic market power. Earlier this year, the IRS finalized a rule that limited the qualified business deduction that's allowed by cooperatives solely to patronage income. Cooperatives often pass these deductions to individual farmers, so the rule effectively raised taxes on the farmers themselves across the country. Is the IRS planning to review this rule that raised the taxes on the farmers and was finalized by the Trump administration?
So let me start with your second one, which I will get back to you, and I will have our staff work with your staff on the specifics for that so that I can get more direct and I think more appropriate responses for you. A lot of the rules, keep in mind, at IRS, we're tax administrators, and policy occurs, I like to say next door, it occurs at the Treasury Department. But let me personally find out more information on that. And I know we've talked outside of hearings before, and we will get back to you on that. And I appreciate the importance of the issue, particularly to farmers during a year such as what we had this year. So that's the importance of that, sir, is not lost on me. With respect to VITA, and by the way, I extend it to all members to reach out to me or to your staff to reach out to me, and where we can help and where we can provide additional information. I would encourage you to do so and look forward to it. It's a privilege to be in this position as commissioner and to interact with you and try to get things as positive as we can for the people that we're all serving. As far as VITA and tax counseling for the elderly and military tax, and in addition, beyond VITA, the low-income taxpayer clinics now have authority through at least April 15 to prepare returns. Certainly the pandemic was not something that I think anybody foresaw. The VITA, there's 11,000 VITA sites which are staffed by volunteers, and it would have been a stretch to assume that volunteers during the pandemic were going to have actual in-person interactions with anybody. I mean, taxpayers did not seek out in-person interactions, and it would be difficult to encourage the VITA sites to do so. And we did not, and I did not. We took a position that closing sites, we run the program, we don't run the sites, but we were supportive of the VITA sites closing their sites and keeping their volunteers safe and keeping the taxpayers safe. We have moved into, to the extent possible, a virtual environment. That does not solve the issues with respect to rural communities, and we're very sensitive to rural communities. You hear a lot come out of the Internal Revenue Service with respect to digitalization of pretty much everything we're doing, the modernization of our processes. But I think, as you're aware, I was on the outside for 36 years representing individuals, and the IRS will never lose its traditional lines of communication, which are in person, telephone, and such. Where we do not have staffing in communities, we tend to what we refer to as circuit ride. Out of 358 tax, we have 14 that we do not have staff for because the people have retired. They tend to be in rural communities, and we try to hire and staff those communities, but when we don't have it staffed, we have to circuit ride, bringing people in from a different location to staff that. So we have our eyes on the VITA and TCE and military tax sites in terms of filing season 21. It's not lost on us. I can tell you that in the last 3 weeks, I've participated in training sessions, I think for maybe 6 or 7 different VITA sites around the country, including, I had a huge honor of participating with 21 VITA sites outside the country, military VITA sites, including a base that my son, who's an Army captain, had deployed to. And so, VITA not only, it does provide for individuals and taxpayers, but it also provides a tremendous service for military personnel, all of which are important. But sir, to your question, I and we have our sights on the impact of the pandemic and the need for VITA sites to have some type of in-person interaction. So we do have our sights on that.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Procan is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner, for being here. I also want to send my kudos to your employees for all the hard work they've been doing. I want to get to 3 areas. I know it's tough, so I'm going to get right to the questions.
I'll try to do shorter answers.
Yeah.
We will have a second round.
All right. First question is on behalf of the Appropriations Chair, Representative DeLauro. You recently predicted the agency would be able to transition the child tax credit payments to a monthly schedule. That would be awesome to have permanent, fully refundable and paid out monthly. It's been a priority for the chair. Heartened by your prediction, wondering what resources you would need to make the monthly child tax credit payments a success.
We have actually, our folks have met with staff, and we have actually provided the figures for that. If I'm not mistaken, the one for the monthly child credit, I think, is about $397 million. We not only need the funding to implement, to actually determine the requirements and to do the programming, but we also need the funding to staff and to train our staff to do it. We need in the first tranche of funding includes the design and delivery of a portal. And I know a lot of people have looked to our non-filers portal and saying, we'll just use that. The non-filers portal was created by industry, by private industry, and it belongs to private industry. The Free File Alliance was critical in helping us launch that portal within 10 days following EIP 1. So there's a lot of constraints in terms of the launch, if you will, staffing, training, and funding, but also, this agency, as much as any other, but, I'm biased because I'm here, consistent, timely, adequate, multi-year funding allows the agency to rise to the challenges. And, don't forget about us once we get something, don't
Gotcha.
forget about us in terms of
Thank
the future years for funding, because we acknowledge the importance. It will be a challenge to modify the amounts of these payments. We're very thankful from what we've seen.
Great, thank you.
There's some flexibilities built into it.
Yeah, so then you just brought up the non-filer portal, and I know you mentioned earlier to Mr. Cartwright's question, that is one area where you guys have done a tremendous job, I think, in getting the stimulus checks out, but that's one area that we still have constituents, as Mr. Quigley said, we hear from those folks, when they don't get their checks. When will the IRS be reopening that portal, and do you have a specific date?
We don't have a specific date with respect to the non-filers portal. People will be able to, what we're focused on now, because people need to know the amount of their EIP1 and the amount of their EIP2 when they file the return to get the recovery rebate credit. And, we sent out letters, 1444 letters with the first EIP and 1444B with the second EIP. And we're actually going to get one number on a tax return. And because of the structure of these, in terms of if there was an overpayment on EIP1, we're not allowed to claw that back. But with respect to EIP2 and the recovery rebate, and I will say this was a challenge, which is incumbent, I should add, as to why the opening season filing date was February 12th, and having it be February 12th. I know a lot of people, and I've read comments about a condensed filing season. It is not a condensed filing season. The industry partners opened in January 15, and others, Free File opened January 15.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Perhaps reopening that, because I can tell you, I know Mike in my office, for one, would be enormously happy, because that still is probably the number one problem we have with folks on stimulus. Third area, if I can get to in a minute, we're currently losing about $574 billion per year for unpaid taxes. As you mentioned, you want to make sure we give you staffing resources as you absolutely need, in addition to the child tax credit. But we also know that you're looking at both people who have the earned income tax credit are audited about the same rate as the top 1%. How do we know if we give you additional funds that it will be used in a different ratio, so that we're really looking at where the vast majority of those dollars are, as opposed to the earned income tax credit earners?
Well, let me finish actually something that came to mind. Finish the first question, which is the folks on the non-filers portal. We would actually encourage the folks to use Free File or the equivalent that are out there, because beyond the non-filers portal, we can only capture information for the EIP, right? The return recovery rebate. A lot of these folks are also entitled to the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit. And if they do the Free File and put a return in, and they're entitled to all three, they can get all three. Whereas if they just use a non-filers portal, they would only get the EIP and miss out on what may be a much more significant amount. In terms of the EITC and the audit rates, I would encourage people to look at our 2019 data book, page 34, table 17A, and let it run. Look at all of it. The hardline data is that we only audit, and it's correspondence audits, but 1.1% of EITC claims, whereas for the higher income taxpayers over 10 million, we audit 8.16%, 5 to 10 million, 4.39%, and 1 to 5 million, 2.39%. Substantially every experienced revenue agent is working a high income taxpayer or our most egregious cases, which would be fraud cases. So we're focused on that. We are required by IPERA to come up with the oh gosh, the word escapes me, but the improper payment rate associated with refundable credits. That's what causes the Internal Revenue Service to actually have to look at 1.1%. We do it in as polite a manner as you could think. We send out letters and we ask for information. It's a very complex situation. We would love to work with staff on the Hill. I know this goes back to 1975, but to try to work out a less complex situation for EITC. My personal reaction is those funds are getting to the right people. The roadway is a little complex. And I think, this is the year that people really have an understanding to help others. It's our mutual responsibility to help these folks. And I think it's a privilege. And, collectively, we have the ability to change it.
And again, we have to move on, make sure all our,
That was my
Members.
shorter version of an answer. Sorry, I'm
that's
trying.
okay. Thank you. Ms. Torres.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioner Reddick. Welcome to our committee, and thank you for being here with us. I'm going to focus on not-for-profit organizations. I was disappointed to see a 501c5 in my district, the Pomona Fairplex, abuse its tax-exempt status. In addition to straying from its mission of horticultural enhancement, a 2016 report by the California State Auditor revealed that the executive director was receiving over $1 million in compensation and excessive gifts, far above most other salaries for executives at similar organizations. To be fair, he was not the only one. The top 3 executives were grossly overcompensated, and the board of executives received thousands of dollars in gifts, travel, which included fine dining and wine. While the organization was audited and several changes were forced to avoid heavy penalties, I thank the IRS for that, the taxpayers once again absorbed the losses of previous years. This year, in the FSGG fiscal year 21 report, I included language directing the IRS to improve its oversight of nonprofits that do not comply with their tax compliance statuses. So my first question is, what is the IRS doing to improve oversight of tax organizations such as the Fairplex that abuse their tax compliance status? And my second question is that on February 17th, the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration released an audit entitled Non-Compliant Activity by Exempt Organizations. The audit found that the chance of a tax-exempt organization being audited is 1 out of 742. It also found that nearly 20% of tax-exempt organizations' returns selected for examination were not examined. So my second question to you is, why are organizations that were selected for examination not examined?
So those are the 2 questions, right? So on the
Yes.
first question,
how are you improving it? And yeah.
On the first question, obviously I cannot speak to specifics as to any taxpayer and whatnot. I can tell you that we have a robust system in terms of identifying, and we get a lot of referrals from other parts of our agency. We get referrals from the outside. As you can imagine, also our employees read newspapers and magazines, and we see reports, and we get assistance from TIGTA, we get assistance from GAO, we get assistance from the Hill. And our people appreciate the fact that we live in a country that has nonprofits and charitable organizations that provide a lot of social benefits that otherwise might not be provided, or certainly might not be provided by the government. And certainly not maybe to the level and quality. So I can assure you that we look at these situations as you would hope. If you were sitting in my chair, I think you would be proud of what we are able to do. To the question with respect to where we are not examining, I would draw the attention to the staffing and resources of the Internal Revenue Service in 2010 compared to any of the most recent years. We have to sort of pick our battles. We make, unfortunately, a lot of the decisions we make are resource driven. We do use, my terminology, an empty police car. You see a lot of my speeches involve where we're going. I say, be forewarned, we're coming here. That doesn't mean we're coming with 1,000 agents or we're coming with 100 agents, but we do have to have presence, I believe, in every community, which is defined by type of taxpayer, as well as income levels, as well as geographic and whatnot. I will say that about 20% of tax-exempt governmental entities casework comes from the rest of the Internal Revenue Service, but that those sources, those referrals, if you will, generate about 40% of the examination results that are there. As much as we would like to do a full examination on every taxpayer that we select for examination, we have resource constraints. So
I understand. I
But I would-
understand all that, Commissioner, and I appreciate you coming forward and seeking more resources because I do understand that you are under staff, that you don't have the manpower to do the job that you need to do. But instead of targeting the poor, what I am asking is, will the IRS commit to focusing more resources toward auditing organizations that are, you're absolutely correct. Their purpose is to provide and offset services in our communities. But when the only people that are primarily benefiting from these are their top executives or board of directors, you know, where does it stop?
Yeah, I will say that the public wouldn't know whether we did or didn't touch an executive from an organization. Only if the executive actually took us to court, that's the first time it becomes public. So whether we did or didn't touch somebody, and I will say with respect to the returns that we might select for examination but not examine, we do reviews. So we make decisions out of the pool that we have of which would have the highest audit potential. But people should not believe that we're not touching. This is not specific to the entity that you referenced, but you know, we are doing our best, and I do not have resources to reallocate to this issue.
Mr. Chairman, I will yield back and wait for the second.
Very good. Thank you. Ms. Kirkpatrick, who's always so patient.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Commissioner. I just want to follow up on the Congresswoman's line of questioning. You know, we appreciate the challenges that COVID-19 has presented to the IRS, be that related to staffing and continuing operations or implementing COVID relief measures. But, you know, I really want to know what you're doing to ensure tax compliance among high income individuals. That's a top priority of mine. This is certainly a welcome development, but I'd like to hear more about how you're doing that and how that's working out.
Yeah, I will. I've probably said, you know, in the past 2 years, I've probably said 100 times, I consider myself not only a service person with, you know, eyes and friends on the street, if you will, but also an enforcement guy. And a strong enforcement program and a strong enforcement and a visible enforcement presence supports the compliant taxpayer. The compliant taxpayers need to know that we actually have eyes on and are creating risk for the folks who do not comply, and particularly the higher income taxpayers. During the past 2 years, we have created an Office of Fraud Enforcement, which is designed to actually bring fraudulent cases on the civil context and look and refer those cases for criminal investigation. It has been highly impactful. It is service-wide. That did not previously exist. We actually, this past year, created a Office of Promoter Investigations, because it tends to be the higher income folks who get involved in abusive transactions. I think you can see a lot of information during the course of the past year with respect to our efforts on abusive syndicated conservation easements, abusive micro-captive arrangements, virtual currencies, both domestic and foreign situations, and a lot of what you might consider to be aggressive taxpayer work. We are using artificial intelligence, data, and analytics to go after folks in that regard. Our modernization program is 3 years in. In each of the first 3 years, we received about half of the funding that we requested. So we've had to pull funds in order to stay on target to the extent we can. We've had to pull funds in from other programs to get us there. For high income non-filers, which is among the most abusive scenarios, we, prior to the pandemic, we did what we call revenue officer compliance sweeps, which is essentially just a revenue officer, a team of revenue officers showing up and knocking on somebody's door. We have information, but we also need the resources to be able to do this. We did a variation of the in-person rocks during the pandemic, and we are continuing that. I will say that during the pandemic, our People First initiative, we pulled back and provided a lot of relief to taxpayers. We did not pull back enforcement efforts for higher income taxpayers. We kept the pressure on. It had to be in a virtual environment, as you would imagine, but we did not let up, and we did not let up on our behind the scenes efforts to coordinate what we have. So we have a high focus on high income, high asset individuals. And I will say, again, every experienced revenue agent that we have is on the higher income taxpayers and the abusive transactions. And we could use more experienced revenue agents. We did have a hiring freeze from 2011 to 2018, which created a gap. I can't hire a revenue agent and then the next year have that person be with 5 years of experience trained to go out against the high income taxpayer communities. And also it takes our more experienced people offline to train the people that we do hire. And it becomes very difficult. So staffing, taking a look at us and providing support in terms of staffing, funding for training and overall funding. You guys have been great. The Appropriations Committee has been, I think, superb. I couldn't ask for more, and our people appreciate it. And keeping us in that lane, I think, would help. We can be impactful, and we are working really hard to be impactful. There have been some noteworthy criminal cases. We investigate tax crimes. Our criminal investigation division investigates tax crimes, and we make the referral to the Department of Justice for prosecution. But we work very closely with the tax division of the Department of Justice, and we appreciate the relationships that we have. I have regular meetings with them on the criminal prosecutions. So we are engaged. That's probably more than you wanted to hear, but.
Thank you. On a very practical matter, when I was practicing law, I did business law and tax law, and the auditors would just show up.
We're hiring. If you're looking, we're
No, not right now, but what kind of notice do you give these people that they're going to be audited? I mean, it was very stressful for my clients because the IRS would just show up on their doorstep and seize all their records and with no notice whatsoever.
We'll let him answer this question, then we'll move on to the second.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Certainly.
Yeah, I don't know about the cases that you had, but we do not just show up. We send letters, in part because of scams and everything else. We also don't place the calls to initiate an audit and all of that. But we send letters, and people are given 30 or more days. They schedule, now it's virtual, but meetings with us. But I'd like to talk to you about your experience at some point, because if that was going on, it should not.
Yeah, that was a long time ago, but thank you for being sensitive to that. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioner, we're going to try to wing through perhaps a quicker, shorter second round. Oh, I'm sorry, they don't have your name on here. They didn't bring it back. I'm sorry, Miss Lawrence.
Okay, thank you.
I apologize.
Okay. My question, thank you for this hearing, is that taxpayers continue to face frustrations with reaching a live representative seeking help from the IRS to ensure that they are complying with their tax obligation. We know that the account management lines are only handling 14% of the calls, which is down from 61%. What resources do you think are needed to improve the taxpayer customer service and interactions with the IRS?
This, what we refer to as level of service is very important to not only the Internal Revenue Service as an agency, but to the people of the Internal Revenue Service, the employees, and obviously to members of Congress, as well as to taxpayers, represented and unrepresented taxpayers. The IRS needs to be able to answer the phones and coordinate things for people. We have a lot of online and other processes, but at the end of the day, I think many people are comfortable with the ability to get somebody on the phone and have somebody say that.
Do you agree with the 14% number, that's all that you're answering right now, 14% of the calls?
No, we have different lines. So I can get you the actual statistics. We have different lines. We have 89 different toll-free lines. And so if you're looking at a certain one, it's going to be something, but let me add that the percentages of our phone calls, I like to ask people, not to you specifically, ma'am, but how many calls do you think the IRS and the IRS employees want to answer out of 10? The answer is readily 10. it's math at the end of the day. That
But at the end of the day, how can we improve this number? Because that's the challenge. I'm not questioning loyalty, but I'm questioning efficiency.
I'm with you, and I appreciate your question. Every 10% increase in level of service is $100 million. So we target, we're now targeting for 2023, and this is part of how we got into the situation of having our phone answering drop below 5 out of 10, which is the target. We request 75%, the ability to answer 7.5 out of 10 calls. We got funded for 5 out of 10 for what's the current year, but that happened 2 years ago. That funding happened, which was pre-pandemic, which was pre-EIP 1, pre-EIP 2, and everything associated with the pandemic. So we got funded to have a certain number of what we refer to as customer service representatives, which is 13,760. We just brought on seasonals, which we refer to as CSRs, 3,800. We made a request for another 1,000, but the math for 20,000, it would take 20,000 CSRs to give us a 75% level of service, and it's dollars in, and I'm not allowed to take funds, if you will, from enforcement or ops support and replenish and hire, and it takes us 3 months to train the average CSR to get them online, and they do need to be trained.
So are you asking for more funding? Because my objective is to increase that number. 14% is unacceptable. So what do you need to get there?
I would like to have our people have a discussion with you, and we can show the metrics to get us where we want to get. And we would greatly appreciate your support. I think you're on the right line here, and I appreciate it.
So I have a minute left. I'm going to ask the question about modernization. I think that leads to what I was just speaking about. You collected $3.5 trillion on the budget. IRS also relied on IT to process and disperse the economic impact payments. What critical IT investments are needed to fulfill the agency's critical role of supporting tax support for our communities? And that goes back to probably my other question. Is it funding? Because we can talk about what's happening, but how do we make it better?
Funding. That's my shorthand, and my longhand answer is it's funding. We do have our business modernization plan that's in its 3rd year. And like I said earlier, is each year we got funded for half of what we requested. It's a 6-year plan of $2.3 billion to modernize. We did get funding, CARES Act funding, that allowed us to be as agile as we were. It allowed us to onboard people during the pandemic. The pandemic moved very fast. It came out of nowhere. It hit the private sector as well as government agencies quite quickly. And unfortunately, it hit us during a filing season, which made it more difficult. And then we inherited, EIP 1 and EIP 2. I would really appreciate the opportunity for me to sit with your staff and others, and we can provide you with specific information. But at the end of the day, it's funding, staffing, and training, as well as some of the modernization. And just to quickly give you something that's in my mind, which is we're going into this year, but the concept of chat bots where people contact us online.
Yes.
One CSR can answer one phone call at a time. And during the pandemic, I should add, our phone call time has gone to like 17 minutes from 12 minutes because the issues are more complex and the people who call in want to talk, and we want our people to talk frequently. We are their only contact with the government. But I will say in terms of chatbot, one CSR can handle one phone call, but they can handle 4 incoming on the chatbot. So the ability to leverage the people we have is also very important.
Okay, I will definitely work with you to improve.
Yeah, we'll be in touch. I appreciate it.
I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Orange. And we're going to go through this lightning round where we're now asking folks to do 3 minutes. And we appreciate, Commissioner, you hanging on. I know this is a lot about resources. One of the issues we have concerns about relating to that is you tell me if this number is right. We have 8.7 million unprocessed tax returns from 2019 filing system. Is that accurate, roughly?
We have 6 million, they're all in process. So they've all entered the stream to be processed. And at the end of the stream, they get what's called posted to the account. So we have 6 million returns in process. 5 million of the 6 million, we have actually asked taxpayers for information, and we're waiting. And I think you're aware, during the People First initiative, we extended the timeframes for people to respond to us. Not that we deserve a pat on the back for obvious reasons. It's during the pandemic, mail and other things were slow. But 5 of the 6 million got pulled out either because of an identity theft situation where we need the person to verify who they are. And we have 2 different online abilities, plus we have in-person abilities for people who are not comfortable dealing with us online. Similarly, if we got a return and it's not consistent, which is the extent I can really go on this one with you, for reasons I can get more specific off individually with all of you. But if we get a return electronically and it's not consistent with the information for a prior year return, it will kick out as maybe being an ID theft return. So we need verification on this is actually the person. And then there are some that people needed to file an additional form with respect to some of the refundable credits. So we sent the forms out to individuals. So all of those are in process.
Is this typical, the numbers that we're talking about into the next year, that there's what you're describing, having this many returns still being processed, or as you describe, a significant number waiting for additional information? Is this about average?
No, this is high for us. This is probably, a few million high. I can probably get you a year-to-date specific on that. I probably have it on my desk here, but.
Oh, and I get that. In other words, I assume this is something you prioritize going into the new year.
Absolutely.
And do you also prioritize the 2020 returns that contain a recovery rebate credit? Is that in your system?
Absolutely.
All right, Mr. Womack.
I think real quickly, 21 Approach Act gave an additional 400+ million over 2020. Various COVID relief packages have given the IRS an additional 1.3 billion. Majority's reconciliation package, about 2 billion more. Before your time, Commish, not too long ago, the IRS had some much celebrated, that's probably not the right word. There were some issues going on. Let's just leave it at that. With this influx of funding, convince me that this money is going to be treated as it should be, with the highest amount of respect, because I mean, we're talking about a lot of additional funding. And I know when you throw a lot of money at the wall, some of it has the chance to be spent on things that are not necessarily all that important. So help me understand how we're going to curb wasteful spending.
Yeah, I think you're aware, I came on board because of some of the issues that you're talking about, and my respect not only for the country, but for tax administration. I did not come on board to go get my next dream job. I left my dream job with my best friends and moved to Washington, D.C. with my wife in order to try to make things better. We and I do treat the funds, we're very respectful and appreciative of the funds we do get. But we do treat these funds and understand that we're really the trustees of funds collected from taxpayers and others. And we are very specific as to where funds are spent and really efforts. There's a difference, and I was aware of this on the outside, I'm very aware on the inside, between having power and exercising that power. We don't have a lot of discretion in certain areas, but you should know, and I'd be more than willing to sit with you and others one-on-one, virtually, or however people would want to do it, to go through the specifics, how we spend money. We do not throw money over the wall just to see what would happen. We are accountable. I'm accountable for it. We have a lot of people here who are accountable for it. And it's very important to get us from where we are to, I think, where the American people deserve to have their agency. We're way beyond a tax administration, tax collection agency. And I think we demonstrated that this year. We provide a lot of services to the American people, and we're proud to do so. And that's not to say that we're without mistakes. That's not to say that foot faults or others don't occur. I have 80,000 plus employees under a highly stressed situation in a pandemic where, with others, we were pushing our people very hard, continuing to do so. And sometimes when you swing for the fences, things happen. But I did not come on board the Internal Revenue Service to leave the agency at the end of my term in the scenario that it was when I got on board. That's not disrespectful to any prior commissioner. It's just, I think collectively and with you and with others up on the Hill, we want tax administration to be better. It needs to be transparent, and myself and others here are and need to be accountable. So whatever controls people want, I gave an explanation, I think, a year or so ago, and I believe it was in front of your committee, that I'm actually supportive of funding that comes our way, as long as it's multi-year, but funding that comes our way. And I gave the example of people who build a house and you go to the bank, and the bank doesn't give you $500,000 day one to build the house. They give you money for the flooring, the structure, the drywall, the roofing, the paint as you go through it. And I think Congress would be impressed if they saw how we dealt with our responsibilities for these funds. We would need to know that the funds would be there at the end of the day for our projects. Otherwise, we pull up short, as you can imagine. But your question is well received and appreciated. I'm hopeful that we are quite respectful with respect to the funds we do receive. And I should add, if we don't get something right, you all should expect us to come up and tell you we didn't get it right. You shouldn't be reading about it somewhere. And I think we've done a fairly good job of that, particularly during the pandemic. And we did not get everything right.
I appreciate your responses. Please share my thanks and appreciation to your team, and also for the service of your son, who's in our great military. Thank you so much, and I yield back.
Appreciate that.
Thank you. We echo, the entire committee echoes a response, especially the added words to the service of your son. Mr. Cartwright.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Rettig, I really liked Mr. Womack's questions, and I associate myself with them. We have to make sure that money is being spent well, if it's being spent at all. We've really identified in this hearing 2 areas where it looks like you need more money. Congresswoman Lawrence focused in on CSRs and how many of the phone calls are being returned and whether it's 14% or more. But you came up with a very important metric that I wrote down. You need a $100 million increase for every 10% of increased calls returned. I think that's helpful, and it's helpful in responding to Mr. Womack's questions. But the other area is tax cheats, okay? And that's something Congressman Pocan talked about, Congresswoman Kirkpatrick talked about. First off, the tax cheat number, Mr. Pocan threw in excess of $500 billion a year out. Is that a fair number, Commissioner?
Well, I think for that, he's drawing off of the tax gap. And if you take the last tax gap we did for tax years 2011 to 13, the net tax gap was about 381 billion per year of what's due but not paid and not reported. And people have extrapolated that into the present day.
Gotcha. Okay, let me stop you there. I understand what you're saying. And I prefer tax cheats to tax gaps. I think a tax gap is a euphemism. People that aren't paying their taxes are tax cheats. Here's what I want to know. Can you come up with a metric about how much additional money you need per every 10% of unpaid taxes that we want to haul in? Can you do that? And that'll help Mr. Womack in his question as well.
We will be with you. Keep in mind, the tax gap is not individuals. It's how this metric is determined. But let me also add, where people are missing is 2011 to 2013 was the last study that we did. We're actually working very hard with our research inside to create a forecast to be able to go forward, because 2013 is not reflective of 2020 and 21. If you just think in terms of virtual currencies that did not exist in 2013, that are prevalent in 2020 and 21, and that were designed essentially to be anonymous and stay off the radar screen. So if you think that part of the economy is compliant, we're all mistaken. And I think the number could be significantly greater. And I will come to you, to all of you, with information about where we could use funds for enforcement. And again, at the end of the day, it's systems, it's data analytics, artificial intelligence. I've had a lot of communications, private sector on those issues. It's also staffing and training. And you're going to see something come up where we talk about the buckets. Unfortunately, sometimes we get enforcement money and it goes into the enforcement bucket, but I can't use 5,000 agents if I also, in our ops support budget, can't get phones and computers and whatnot. So sometimes we get funding for staff, but I don't get the phones and computers.
Understood. Thank you, Commissioner. That is helpful. Get us the metrics and we'll help get you the money.
We really appreciate your comments and questions today from all of you.
Thank you. And I remind everyone, we're in the 3-minute round, and I move on to Mr. Joyce.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner, I want to go back to the recovery rebate credits. Many Ohioans have expressed confusion over who is eligible for the recovery rebate credit. And I understand that eligible individuals who did not receive these credits as advanced economic impact payments may be able to claim the recovery rebate credit on their 2020 returns. I know that many folks, such as those that were claimed as a dependent in 19, but will not be claimed as a dependent in 20, are hoping to claim the recovery rebate credit when they file their tax returns this year. Now that the season is underway, can you first discuss the process a taxpayer should go through to claim this credit on their 2020 return, and also comment on whether certain groups of people who did not receive an economic impact payment but may be eligible to claim the recovery rebate credit?
Keep in mind that the EIP1 and EIP2 were advance payments of the recovery rebate credit. So everything trues up on the 2020 return. If an individual was claimed as a dependent for 19, but is not claimed as a dependent for 20, that individual is entitled. The answer, yes, they are entitled to the return recovery rebate on their 2020 return.
Right list, it was my fault.
And I would suggest that they file that electronically and they do so as quickly as possible. On irs.gov, we have a special recovery rebate credit page that will walk people through the information. The 2020 return, which I'm proud to say is actually in both English and Spanish for the first time in the history of the United States. The 2020 return has a return recovery rebate worksheet, and there is a specific page where they would enter one single number once they have whatever they got for EIP1, EIP2, and they would put the information in there. And the phase outs were different for EIP1 and EIP2, but we will do that calculation and we will issue a notice and we'll issue those credits, and they're refundable credits. People are entitled to those, and we're anxious to be able to get those back out to people as quickly as possible.
Great, thank you.
Are you through, Mr. Joyce?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I've sent back what little time I have remaining.
Well, we certainly appreciate it. Mr. Bishop.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask the commissioner if he would speak a little bit about cybersecurity and identification fraud. I think it was in December of last year that the service allowed individual identity protection, personal identification numbers relative to the cybersecurity and the ID fraud and impersonations. Can you speak to that and to how well that has been received, and if there's something that we need to do by way of getting information out to our constituents, or whether you should to do that, follow up on that?
We should both follow up on that. It's our privilege and responsibility to get this information out to the communities. We can certainly provide some information that you can send out through your local offices to get out to people. This is a very significant issue. We have been successful. From 2015 to 2020, the ID theft numbers, the victims of ID theft went from 1.4 million to 96,000, but it's still 96,000. We saw a lot of fraud going on, scams and whatnot during the pandemic. A lot of people felt that, IRS and taxpayers were vulnerable and tried to take advantage of that. I think many of you saw it in the most visible was the the people applying for PPP loans that didn't even have a business, but it happened at individual levels and it hit individual taxpayers. So the taxpayer protection program and the expanded IP PIN, we expanded the IP PIN nationwide, where individuals can actually get a 6-digit number to use in association with their social security number so that we know it's them. The ID thieves tend to file early so that the refunds go out to them, and the other individuals might file their return a little later, and refunds, as you know, would go out as returns are being processed. So we would encourage folks to use the IP PIN. We would encourage folks to file early. I think so far this year, we've issued about 5 million IP PINs, but I would appreciate the opportunity to get some information to you all and to others up on the Hill to be able to disseminate. It's been a successful program, but the fact is it's still 96,000 people and we need to keep our eye on it. Each one of those folks will have a difficult year or 2 years if their ID gets stolen. So, we look at the individuals who have the issues, not the ones that we've been able to avoid having the issues.
Thank you, Commissioner. I yield back.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Pocan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Commissioner, I'll ask 2 questions just so you've got a little more time with it.
I'll try to be
I'm
brief.
sorry if I ask anything. I had to go to a concurrent hearing. First of all, there was a Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration report about the credit and debit card companies and other third parties that verify income for individuals and businesses. And they talked about the enforcement on that. It looks like there were 300,000 business taxpayers with over 335 billion in income who the IRS knew should have filed tax returns, but they failed to do so. Just wondering, as you collect the 1099-K information in order to assure the accuracy of what taxpayers voluntarily report, why aren't we using that information to narrow the tax gap, and what changes you might be looking at based on that report? And the second question, and I don't know if you addressed this, is will the IRS be extending the filing deadline this year?
On your second question, we're looking at extending the filing deadline, but understand that there's a lot of confusion for taxpayers when we do extend the filing deadline. Presently, we don't see a need to extend the filing deadline. Individuals can get an extension to October 15. And what happened to us last year when we extended into July.
What happened?
I think he muted himself.
I'm muted.
There you go.
I didn't touch anything. Hands off. So
Likely story.
it's my story. I'm sticking with it, sir. So in terms of the filing season, we have no present plans to extend the filing season. That, keep in mind, it creates a lot of confusion for taxpayers. It also backs up the Internal Revenue Service. As many of you know, for over a month, we actually shut down our systems to import stuff from the prior year so we can have a smooth filing season in the succeeding year. And so we have our eyes on it. We're aware of it. We're aware of people who are asking for it. But I will say that, the private sector, I probably know several thousand accountants on a first name basis. And the private sector went into tax season by the second week of January. They're well into it. It's the real concern for folks is really the people who get refundable credits, EITCs, CTCs. And I think we did a good job of messaging that although we opened on February 12th, we're still planning on.
Gotcha, Mr. Commissioner. In the remaining 30 seconds on the 1099-K reports.
1099-K reports, we have our eyes on it. A lot of times the reports that you see from TIGTA or others are more in the vein of a Polaroid snapshot, not of a movie, and we operate in a movie. So if we didn't get something completed by the time that they're there, that we can get back in touch with you, but rest assured we have our eyes on it.
I'll yield back my 3 seconds.
Oh, you can keep them.
For next time.
Torres.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, I know you've covered this a little bit, but I might have missed some of it. You mentioned that the IRS has dealt with a 20 million backlog, but there have been reports that refunds from last year are still unprocessed. An issue that my district office has been dealing with is that many of my constituents file paper tax returns. And when filing amendments to their taxes, they have waited over 6 months without a change to their tax status. When pressing the IRS liaisons for more information, they were told that the backlog was so burdensome that there were trailers full of paper returns just languishing without any attempt to address the problem. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what you need to ensure that this backlog is completed and behind us?
There were trailers in June. There are no trailers today. We're current on our mail backlog. And then in terms of returns, we have 6 million returns in process. So we've identified the returns. We've started moving them through the system. Of the 6 million, 5 million require additional information, whether it's verifying a taxpayer's identity, whether it's verifying that that return actually is consistent, which is different than ID verification. For people with some of the credits, there were forms missing, so there was outreach to get the forms. What I would suggest is we separately set up a call with your folks, get whoever you have that you're not getting responses to. I will get on the call with our key people and we'll go through your people, make sure that you have the authority for us to actually talk about the people, but we'll do the calls. We've done quite a bit of those, and we want to make sure, one, that we serve you, but also that we serve your folks, and that we get it right. So
Thank you.
I will be available, and we'll coordinate that.
Thank you, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Kirkpatrick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Commissioner. I just have a follow-up to my previous question. Do you have an estimate as to how much tax revenue is lost due to lack of enforcement, especially from high-income individuals?
The only estimate, and I don't subscribe to this estimate, the only estimate that's out there publicly is the tax gap number. The tax gap number was based on 2011 to 13, and it doesn't include certainly the whole virtual currency world, which has a market cap of about $1 trillion a year. And virtual currencies, are designed to sort of be off the radar screen, if you will. So we believe that the numbers that are out there are not reflective to reality. The net tax gap for 2013 was $381 billion per year. If you gross that up, some people have said it's 541. I didn't know if I was out of time. I heard something.
No, you're fine.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I just want to thank all you and all your employees. This is a tough time, and I just appreciate all the work that you're doing. It's so necessary, and I just want you to know my personal appreciation for what you're doing.
We appreciate your comments, and our people do watch these hearings, and they critique me. I get a whole bunch of emails. You didn't this, you didn't that. But your comments and the comments of everybody on the committee, I can absolutely verify and confirm go well to our employees, and our people work really hard. And it's inspiring to be with our people, I have to tell you.
They do work really hard, and I thank you for that. One more question. In your view, would increasing funding for tax enforcement, especially on the wealthy, increase overall revenue for the federal government?
Enforcement is a component of compliance, and so we need to increase what we're doing on the front end in terms of guidance and related, as well as enforcement. So the two go together. Most people file a return and try to get it right. I'm incredibly proud that during 2020, during the pandemic, during EIP1, during EIP2, and the rest, that we actually came up and for the first time, I mentioned earlier, have a tax return for 2020 that's going to be in English and Spanish. We have a Schedule LEP that allows individuals to check 20 different boxes of what language they want us to interact with them. Our translation services for folks who call in on the phones in 350 different languages. That's part of it as well, because the communities that want to get it right, we need to help them get it right, and getting in language is very important. A lot of people are bilingual, but they're not tax bilingual. And so being able to communicate with them in language on writing, online, and whatnot is very important to us. And that helps the front end, which helps the voluntary compliance rate. And the enforcement, us being out there on the streets, enforcement happens by audits, but we get there often by modernization, which is our use of data, analytics, and artificial intelligence. So it's staffing, training, modernization, and guidance, and it goes together. We must support the people who are trying to get it right, and we must go after the people who really are working against us and remain non-compliant.
One more comment.
Oh, go ahead.
Thank you so much. I represent a southern Arizona district that borders Mexico, and so many of my constituents speak Spanish, and many of them only Spanish. So I appreciate your efforts in that regard. I really do. Thank you.
Yeah, you may know, I think other members of the committee know, not only am I very proud of my son, and I do appreciate that, and I'm sure he's going to watch and think that he was the star of your guys' comments, but much appreciated, just not for him, but for all the military people who are serving domestically and around the world. They and their families give up an awful lot. But the second part, in terms of languages and such, I'm not only proud to be the first commissioner whose son or daughter is active duty United States military, but I am also the first commissioner whose wife came into this country as a refugee. And my in-laws live in Little Saigon in Southern California and are not fluent in English. So we have a line of sight, if you will, to the curbs. And I very much appreciate, my nephews live in Arizona, and I very much appreciate. And growing up in Los Angeles, you know, I understand Spanish fluently and I can speak Spanish fairly decently, but, you know.
Well, thank you, Ms. Payne. Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Patrick. I want to afford the ranking member an opportunity to close if he wishes. Anything you want to add, sir?
No, look, I appreciate the commissioner for his responses today. He's been very thorough in everything that he's been asked. And now that we know that we got a lot of IRS people that are on the call, I want them to know how much we deeply appreciate their responses as well under or their work as well under very adverse circumstances, as I said in my opening remarks. And we truly appreciate it. And thanks for the hearing. And Mr. Chairman, I'm going to yield back my time.
Thank you. We're about to conclude today's hearing. To ask any members who have additional questions, submit them in writing. And Commissioner, we ask you to respond in a timely manner if they come in. And again, we appreciate your generous time today and your candidness and the great work you do and all those who work with you at the service. With that, the committee stands adjourned.
Thank you all.